Covered by us, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. My name is Brian Hyde, and twice a week I get to sit down and explain some of the more egregious examples of media deception or just simple distortion of facts that would prevent people like you and me from coming to informed conclusions about what's actually happening in our world, particularly as it relates to how government is corresponding with us. Got a couple of great examples to start us out today. This is actually from CBS News. Higher minimum wages will go into effect January 1st across 22 states, giving an economic boost to almost 10 million workers, according to a recent estimate. Well, that seems like pretty good news. Now, hey, here's a CBS affiliate running another story. Let's see what's this? Oh, California Pizza Hut operators cutting all delivery driver jobs in 2024 due to minimum wage increase. Who could have seen that coming? Anybody who understands and defends the free market, that's who. But that's not something we're allowed to consider. And the funny thing about it is these news organizations will post stories like this, dueling stories, without the slightest sense of irony that one is telling one tale and one is telling another. Kind of makes you wonder, why would they do that? What benefit is it to them to spin things in a way that no matter what government does, it must be right? Or if something goes wrong, well, it can't possibly be our fault. It's probably just those greedy Pizza Hut owners. Let me give you another example of what this kind of distortion looks like. This is an extreme example. This is out of Great Britain, but again, it's a mindset that's echoed even by our corporate press here in Idaho. Heartbreak as transgender woman, age 29, dies. I loved her for who she was. Now, look, I have to say before I go any further, this is not to make fun of a person's death or tragedy. The thing that's on the hot seat here is the media bias. And wait until you see what we learn that she died from. What does the story tell us? Heartbreak as transgender woman, age 29, dies of testicular cancer. The grieving partner of a transgender woman and dad of two, that's the one who died that they're talking about, has described how she bravely battled cancer. Testicular cancer. Now, in a normal world where normalcy rules, most people would be like, this makes no sense. In bizarro world where the media are narrative enforcers and their job is to make sure that everybody is towing the line and using the correct verbiage, this is how things are reported. We're supposed to suspend disbelief. We're supposed to disregard reality. And if we don't, well, let's just say you're an extremist and probably not a very good person. Or so the narrative goes. All right, let's come back to a thought here. This was from my friend Connor Boyack. Since school choice is going to be, again, a big issue when the Idaho legislature meets next month, I thought Connor had some very keen insights. Having talked to parents all over the country, actually, he's traveled all over the world promoting the ideas of freedom, free markets, private property, and so forth. And as the author of the Tuttle Twins books, he's been very, very good at getting these principles into the minds of young children. Now, CNN, among others, call it indoctrination, but for some reason, they don't see other types of indoctrination for what it is. Connor says, many years ago, I realized that much of public education is geared toward normalizing socialist ideas and even conditioning kids to accept socialism. But it's done so discreetly that many parents don't even realize it. Now, I bring this up because this is going to be front and center, at least for part of the session. School choice is going to be, once again, up for a vote, and it's going to be interesting to see the machinations that certain legislators from the Uniparty, the establishment Republicans and their Democrat colleagues, are going to use to try to blunt any kind of competition coming into the education realm. There can only be competition within the public school realm. That's the only choice you need. You can have any color as long as it's black. Kind of like Henry Ford said about the old Model T. So here are 4 things that Connor has identified in which public education is normalizing socialist ideas. Tell me if any of these sound familiar. Number 1, the group versus the individual. He says, it seems like in many classrooms, there's a strong focus on group achievements. And while teamwork is great, Connor says, I've noticed a tendency to downplay individual efforts. This shift subtly aligns with socialist thinking, where the group often overshadows the individual, and he says, it worries me that it might be teaching our kids to undervalue their own hard work and abilities. Right? You're just part of a collective. You're not an individual. And that really is, I think, a lot of the philosophy that is being drilled into these kids' heads, thanks to left-wing activists, primarily taking over the teachers' unions. Number 2 on his list, equal outcomes over effort. Connor asks, have you ever noticed how every kid seems to get the same reward these days, no matter how hard they work? While it's important to be inclusive, he says, I can't help but feel this approach echoes a socialist idea that everyone should end up in the same place regardless of effort. He says, I'm concerned it might be sending the wrong message about hard work and personal achievement. Number 3 on his list, big government as the go-to solution. There seems to be a growing narrative that the government is the solution to most problems. While the government has its role, which is to protect our rights, kids should be learning the value of personal initiative and voluntary community effort, rather than defaulting to government as savior. And finally, number 4, a one-sided view of history. In how history is taught, he says, I've noticed a tendency to skim over the darker aspects of socialist and communist regimes. It's as if there's an avoidance of discussing their failures, which doesn't give our kids the full picture they need to understand these complex topics. Oh, they'll tell you all about the evils of slavery and equate that with that was a product of American liberty. But it's not. Actually, American liberty set the stage for those slaves to be freed. And they were, by another people in another time. So why do we obsess over it today? Well, I don't know. Why don't we tear down a few statues and we'll talk a little bit? But we don't hear much criticism of what socialism and communism have done when they are the most anti-human ideologies out there. And their body count, I believe, is unsurpassed. Upwards of tens of millions, probably closely approaching 100 million deaths by those in charge of those regimes. But we're not supposed to notice that. I wonder why that is. Media doesn't talk much about the failures of socialism or communism either. And again, it's a very curious omission. Why so much emphasis on the kids, though? Well, I think this meme actually explains it quite well. We think, as adults, they're trying their best to change the way our children think. And that's why some of these unconscionable ideologies are not only just finding their way into the schools, but actually being into the schools under the guise of inclusivity, equity, and other left-wing ideas. Kind of a strange idea. And who enables this to happen, right? We have a very Republican legislature. Idaho's a very Republican state, so obviously that's not going to be a problem here. Actually, it is. And the reason it is because we have the same problem that many other states have, in that we have a lot of Republicans who tend to govern as Democrats. I like the way J.B. Shirk puts it. He had an article titled The Republicans Paper Lions. And he says the worst kept secret in politics, is that most establishment Republicans play for the other team. If not unofficial card-carrying Democrats, they are full-time members of a uniparty that actively undermines the work of rank-and-file Republicans. For decades, voters haven't been choosing between Democrats and Republicans, but rather between Democrats and Democrats pretending to be Republicans. The illusion of electoral choice has allowed Marxist globalism to advance behind the veil of uniparty tyranny. That pretty well explains, what's going on. And again, this is not unique to Idaho, though we have an especially interesting problem with it. In fact, if you want to see a visual representation, here are the correlation of IACI, that's the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, and the Idaho Freedom Foundation scores, how they score the way legislators have voted on various pieces of legislation. So the IFF score makes up the vertical part of this. The horizontal spread is the IACI score. You notice anything in particular about how those scores go? I'll leave it to Brent Reagan to explain exactly what this means here. Brent says every red dot represents an Idaho Republican legislator. The vertical position of the dot is their IFF Freedom Index score. The horizontal position is their IACI score. The higher their Freedom Index score, the lower their IACI or Slavery Index score. The blue triangles are the Democrat Borg collective hive mind. They vote the way they're told. Yeah, we do have a very serious problem. Now the question is, what can we do about it? Oh, by the way, I thought Brent had a great answer to this. This is Hakeem Jeffries talking about, we will never yield our democracy to the MAGA extremists who want to take it away. Okay, translation, if we let people vote for who they want, Democrats will lose in every way. Little something to think about as we head toward 2024, and especially as we head toward the possibility of voting on ranked choice or rigged choice voting, as some call it, and open primaries. Democrats can't win, and Republicans who act like Democrats can't win under the current closed primary system. So they have to figure out a way to complicate things to where it can be gamed in their favor. Okay, that's the definition of activism, but it's definitely the wrong kind of activism as far as what government is properly supposed to be doing. Now, of course, there is a little bit of celebration on the left as a U.S. District Court judge temporarily blocks enforcement of Idaho law on gender-affirming care for transgender youth. Oh, yes, the usual suspects are weeping into their handkerchiefs over this because they feel like finally we've turned back the horrid specter of not giving young people, permanently altering hormonal treatments or surgically mutilating them. I guess they're very happy about this, and they believe that they're doing the right thing. But this is a big cause for concern for many people. Wayne Hoffman from the Idaho Freedom Foundation actually responded to this, saying that Judge Windmill, one of the many leftist judges in Idaho, has issued a lot of damaging rulings over the years. He says, this is probably Windmill at his worst, comparing gender mutilation to the protection of newly freed slaves after the Civil War, interracial marriage, and access to contraception. Oh, those are all solid left-wing talking points for sure. Not only that, he says Windmill relied on the extremely controversial guidelines of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Boy, there is a made-up title if you have ever heard one. His ruling ignores the fact that extremist ideological groups lobbied to change the way transgenderism is categorized of young people. Children deserve protection, particularly from anyone who would mutilate them. And when you have demented adults who find it not only socially acceptable, but in the medical industry's case, handsomely profitable to mutilate children in this way, there's a real problem. So Idaho lawmakers duly passed, and the legislation was enacted, or at least was signed into law, due to go into effect. Now a judge has stepped up and said, no, you can't do that. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. I'm sure we've not heard the last. Moving on here, Wayne Hoffman also says, where do we go from here? Well, he says, I have some ideas, which our team will be discussing with lawmakers for consideration in the upcoming legislative session. For starters, it's even more important than ever that Idaho taxpayers stop subsidizing medical schools that teach how to perform gender surgeries. Additionally, when Idaho voters passed Medicaid expansion 5 years ago, they probably didn't expect that the program would be used to pay for medical conditions tied directly to transgenderism. Now, he also says, I can't overstate how important it is for you to take an active role in the upcoming session. He says it's critical that our lawmakers hear from you. This means that you are going to need to know how to reach out to your representatives and senators and make your voice heard by the people who are supposed to represent you. This is precisely why we're holding our upcoming Legislature 101 and 201 classes to help prepare you for this important work ahead. And I have to admire Wayne he says, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. He gives his email. He gives his cell phone number. How many people do you see on the left that would do that? They don't really want that. I don't want discussion. I want you to shut up and accept what I'm telling you to accept. Anyway, if you push back against it, you will be called an extremist. And Senator Nichols points out, imagine being called an extreme threat for loving God, family, and country. Now, I'm going to end on this note, again, encouraging you to take the time to sign up for Legislature 101 and Legislature 201. This is an online class, so you can take it from the comfort of your own home. Legislature 101 is a class for people who've never interacted with the legislature. Maybe you just want a refresher course on how things work. I thought I understood it until last year when I attended the Legislature 101 class and went, holy cow. The things that go on in the rules making really determines which bills are going to be heard versus which ones just stay in the Senate president's drawer and are never really answered or never considered. And so you want to know how your legislators work. This is a great way to learn that. And again, this is coming up. Legislature 101 is on January 3rd. Legislature 201 is on January 4th, 2024. 7 o'clock, both nights. 201 class is the advanced class. This is where they talk about the state budget, key policy matters, ways to interact with the lawmaking process at an even higher level. This is how to be a true citizen lobbyist. They'll go over the Idaho Freedom Index, the Idaho Spending Index, and the Idaho Education Index, so you'll be able to hold your lawmakers accountable in real time. Now, some lawmakers welcome this. Those are usually the ones who actually have more of a freedom-minded approach to legislating. Those who don't, those who are members of the Uniparty or Republicans in name only, rhinos, they kind of resent this. Because when they're actually held up to the light, their words and their deeds clearly don't match, and it either makes them out to be hypocrites or opportunists. Now, you can go to idahofreedom.org and register at Legislature 101 and 201. And again, both classes take place online. No need to leave the comfort of your home. Yeah, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Next year is going to be an interesting year. Even if everything does calm down, which I'm not exactly holding my breath that that's going to be the case, but it's going to be a tumultuous year in some ways. The legislative session is probably going to give us a good indication of how that is going to go. You need to be informed. You need to be willing to question what you are hearing in the news. You need to be, and you can question anything that I'm saying as well. I don't mind. I want you to be skeptical enough to suss it out for yourself. Not just take the talking points that somebody's giving you and run with it as if, well, I thought of this, and so therefore it must be true. I can't stress how important this is. The deception can be subtle, but it's also very real. And if we can't count on our corporate media to tell us the facts about the way things are going, then we're going to have to find another way to do it. I hate to tell you this, but that responsibility is going to fall on your shoulders primarily. So learn to propaganda-proof yourself, become a more critical thinker, be willing to ask the questions that others aren't willing to ask, and above all, don't stand in awe of your legislators. Hold their feet to the fire and make sure that their words and their deeds actually line up. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.